Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of the Equipping ELLs Podcast. I am your host, Beth Vaucher, and I am so excited to introduce today's guest, Kelly Aldinger, a bilingual, collaborative, and creative problem solver with 8 years of experience working with diverse populations. Kelly is an expert in learning and development, project coordination, and is highly skilled in using data to drive decision making. Her background in linguistics and education allows her to make a real impact in increasing academic achievement and sociocultural competence for diverse youth. She is deeply committed to fostering educational equity through culturally responsive, standards-aligned, and student-driven instruction. Today, Kelly and I are diving into the power of digital portfolios in showcasing student language development, a tool I believe is crucial, especially as we look ahead to the next school year. This is one of those things that I really want to encourage everyone listening to really take the time this summer to think about. What does this look like in your classroom? How can you make this work? And get it set up now, because it is going to be one of those game-changing tools if you take the time to get it set up now. And that's what Kelly is going to be talking to us about. So Kelly, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yes. Well, let's dive in because we have a lot to cover and not a lot of time. So why don't you start with sharing with us exactly what is a digital portfolio and how is it different from traditional student work folders or report cards?
So a digital portfolio is like having a living, breathing collection of students' language growth over time. So it includes audio, video, and writing samples all in one spot on a Google site. So it's kind of twofold. There's the student and family-facing part, which is the Google site. And then on the back end for teachers, it's a collection in a Google folder for each student of all of their work, where you can analyze against your rubrics for areas of strength and areas of weakness to work on to really help inform your instruction moving forward. So unlike a manila folder with papers to show, it really shows the work in action. So parents can see and hear their child's progress, which is especially powerful for multilingual learners and families who are still learning English themselves, perhaps, because it's visual, it's accessible, and can be translated, the text on the page at least, and just a more meaningful way for families to understand where their child is at in their English learning journey.
I love that. And it's probably so powerful for the students. You know, I think all students, when they take time to look back at the beginning of the year and the middle of the year and the end of the year and see how far they've come, they're just shocked to see, especially, like writing samples, speaking, those types of things. When we really give them that space to reflect and to see their growth, the language learning journey is so long. It's so long. I mean, I've been taking Spanish for 20 years and I still am not near being fluent. I can be proficient. But I just think of how often are we losing our students because they're not seeing the growth they're making and celebrating that success, because we're just keeping moving them forward. And I think digital portfolios are one of those ways that are really a powerful tool to help them see the success they're having, to help them build that confidence, to help them, celebrate what they've done over just continuing to keep going, keep getting there. It's all about getting proficiency in English. That's not really what it's about at all. It's exciting to see opportunities that we can really help to celebrate their success. So have you seen that with your students, just them being so shocked when they listen to where they were at the beginning of the year and then at the end of the year?
Yeah, because we collect beginning of the year samples, and then I'm in a school that runs on trimesters, so we do it at the end of every trimester and including the end of the year. And for them to see each of those data points and be able to see just how much they've grown in each of the categories is really empowering for them. And I've had the privilege of looping with some students too, so I can continue on the next year. And these sites don't go anywhere. It's all of the data is still housed there, so we can compare even just from last year to now. And it's really motivating for kids to continue putting in that hard work because they can see and hear their progress.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that so much. So let's talk about that, the student progress. How do you feel like digital portfolios really help to support a more holistic view of a student's progress? Especially when we're talking about all 4 language domains. I know when I was doing first grade at an IB school, we did student portfolios as a big part of our learning criteria, and doing student-led conferences. It was much more student-led, which is awesome, but it was all paper. And so it was very limiting of, really not seeing the whole view of that student. So how do you feel like those digital portfolios really switch that? They really change that?
So we intentionally collect work samples from all four of those language domains that you listed throughout the school year. And I say intentionally because unlike perhaps other versions of portfolios where students select what they feel is their best work to put in
Yeah.
there, these are more on-demand, real-life touch points of where they were at a particular point in time. And I work in New York State, so those targets of measurement are specific grade level, appropriate language skills and knowledge that students are expected to demonstrate in their English language proficiency. So each of those domains we align to a specific target of measurement, each of those samples rather. That way, it's not just about test scores. It's not a summary or a number as parents might you seeing on a report card. That number doesn't really hold a lot of meaning a lot of times for them. Rather, this allows the students and families to get a full picture of their growth and strengths in their English language development while still being really grounded in the New York State grade level, standards aligned language development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I think that that's one of the biggest things with working with multilingual learners is having that pulse on them throughout the year, really knowing where they're at, knowing how to adjust your instructions so that you can meet their needs and help continue them, to grow in their language development. And I think this is such a beautiful, and it sounds like, and we'll get to this, it might take a lot of work to get it set up, but once it's set up and running and, if hopefully it's school wide, even if people are doing it, it really makes a very cohesive way to check in on student progress for all teachers. So let's talk about that, because I love that it's really rooted in standards still. So it's not that it's just because, like I shared, when we did student portfolios, students picked their best work and that's what went in there and they reflected on it, and it was a good practice. But I love this idea of really having that pulse of really checking in on their language development in all four domains based on standards, whether it's New York standards, WIDA standards, whatever your state standards are. But that can really be guiding what you're doing when you're looking for these pieces of data to put in there. So share with us, Kelly, what metrics or indicators do you find most meaningful when you're assessing your growth in your multilingual learners?
So I use the NYSESLOT rubrics, and NYSESLOT stands for the New York State English as a Second Language Achievement Test, a big long acronym. I use that to kind of score their samples for speaking and writing, and that gives me a pulse because remember, these are like on-demand samples. We don't necessarily strategically prepare for them, right? Like you might for a test. That helps me see right where they are and what I need to do to move them, up to the next level. And that brings consistency to the scoring and reduces subjectivity too, which I think is difficult when filling out those progress reports sometimes.
Yeah.
So for listening and reading, those ones I use tools like the RASL assessments, depending on the grade levels for listening comprehension and reading comprehension. And we also do like reading fluency checks where they are as far as the fluency piece goes, and not necessarily with a number, like words per minute, but in a video format where they themselves can see how their fluency grows. So I think, these are great points and certainly help students and families see where they're growing. But one of the biggest indicators that makes this most meaningful is student reflection. When they can say, oh, last time I did this and now I can do this, and see it and hear it in their sample, empowering.
Absolutely. So you, videos of them reading, you put that in the Google Drive folder. Let's talk through just like the process of behind the scenes, how you get this set up, and then how you implement this throughout the year.
I think a great place to start is to think about what you want the student and family facing part to look like. So I do provide a template of what I'm using that you are welcome to adapt for your own purposes. But it usually features some basic student demographic information, a picture, and then a section for each time period that we're going to be collecting samples, and we'll build it throughout the year. And then from the teacher part, you have to think about, well, what do I want to collect? And I think from my experience, I think depth is better than breadth. So we really just pick one sample per domain. The speaking, I use the RAS ELL assessments and pull those questions because I like how they increase in complexity. Same thing for listening. We use those assessments. And then reading, we do a reading fluency, which could be with really any text that the students are working with, as well as reading comprehension for the older grades. And then for writing, I usually make a prompt based on content that the students have already worked with. So I know that, kind of we've leveled the playing field background knowledge wise, and then administer that on demand. And then I upload those, or students upload them through Google Classroom to a personalized folder, individualized folder, where all of those samples are held. And then I can play those back on my own time, kind of score them against a rubric. And I have my own little progress monitoring spreadsheet where I can input what proficiency level they're scoring at for each of these language domains, and that's helpful for me when it comes to filling out the progress reports. We still have to do those numeric progress reports, but by having these samples all ready to go, it's very easy for me to do so, to fill those out really objectively and be able to just drag and drop those samples into their portfolio, provide a brief description next to the sample of what students were asked to do. And then the nice thing about Google Sites is that you can limit who sees that. So for the published view, I only put the classroom teacher's email, the parents' emails in, and that way nobody else on the internet can see, this information about the student. There's the student and family facing side of the website, the template, and then your own teacher side organizationally of having individual Google Drive folders, a way to, put those samples in there, whether it's you uploading them or students through Google Classroom, for example, and then, building out that portfolio as the year goes on.
That's really powerful. And I love that, just thinking of really narrowing down our focus of what we're assessing, because I think so often with multilingual learners, it gets really, I've seen teachers really try to use, all the assessments they have, or just say like, oh, this is content assessment, but we're also going to assess for listening. And we're also, and it's just really confusing for the students. And it's also really confusing for us to objectively be able to then check in on their progress. So I think really narrowing our focus and saying, okay, this is our listening assessment. This is, here's the rubric I'm using, and really creating that standardization is a really powerful way to have a good pulse on our students and objectively, really see where they're at and seeing what language level they're at, because you're using a rubric. And it really feels simple. I mean, there's only 4 assessments then that have to happen once a quarter or once a term, right? And so, like you've been sharing, once you get that set up, and it's super generous of you to share, and we'll put this in the show notes, but just the examples that you're going to share of that forward-facing one for the parents and for the students, and then, what you have on the back end, because I think this is why I want to share this at this time of year. As teachers, you're going into summer, this is something to think about and start to plan, set up those assessments. That can be really simple, using RAS Kids, using things you already have at your fingertips, but just putting those in place and then knowing what you want to put in their Google Drive folder. Because I think we can, if we don't have a clear plan, we can start adding so many things. It just gets, a dumping ground, and then we don't use it. And this can be a really powerful tool.
I was just going to jump in and say the other thing to remember is that these don't necessarily have to be like isolated assessments. You got to think about what are students already doing, and can I just use some of that? That way we're not over testing students or over assessing, formally, but students are using language all throughout the school day. So if we can think about what are they already doing in their classroom environment, for example, that I can pull from, that also reduces your workload as a teacher on trying to collect these samples.
All right, Kelly. So why don't you walk us through what it looks like on the student reflection side? Because I know that that's a powerful piece, is really giving students that just, autonomy, that understanding, that advocacy for themselves as they see themselves progress through their language journey, and opportunities to celebrate those successes. So how do you incorporate that into your digital portfolios?
So one of the most rewarding parts of this is when I send home those written progress reports, but with a QR code at the bottom for parents to scan to access the digital portfolio. And then kids get to walk their parents through in their home language what they did and be able to really show them that growth. And then I get messages from the parents, celebrating that. And that's a huge piece of this, is that homeschool connection, and that connection between the student and their academic piece and the families. But in school, we also build in that reflection time by adding simple sentence stems like, I used to be able to do this and now I can do this. Just quick review of what is already in their portfolio. We also use glows and grows rather. Glows is like what they're doing well, and grows is something that they can improve on for the future. They can self-reflect, and they can also reflect with peers. because they're able to hear themselves and see their samples. It's really eye-opening for them. And for the upper, elementary students and above, I think we can rephrase our rubrics to be student-friendly language. That way, students can pinpoint exactly what they need to do in order to improve next time. So they're able to set goals after each trimester. Simple ones like even I just want to add more organization, which is part of
Mm.
the writing rubric to my piece, with including an introduction and conclusion sentence, something simple like that they then can measure, on the next sample. So it really builds the confidence, the agency piece, and metacognition for students.
I love that so much. Now, we're running out of time here, Kelly, but I want you to hit on another area that you're super passionate about, and that's just the data-driven instruction piece. Because I know working with multilingual learners, you could have, 10 third graders who are all around level 3, and they all need something different in their language journey. And so, how do you use these portfolios to really identify gaps with your students and really drive instruction based on what your students need?
So as I mentioned, the samples are all within individual student folders, which is great, but not super efficient when you're looking a bird's eye view of where your class is at. So that's why I have a corresponding Google Sheet, and there's a tab for each grade level I work with, students' names and rows, and then the tasks in each column. And for speaking and writing assessments where I'm using our nicest slot rubric, I score them based on that proficiency level input where they are. And I have each writing sample next to each other, right? So I can see their growth. It's all color coded too. So that's helpful because I know what those proficiency levels correspond to on the writing rubric. I know what I need to do. If it's, they're transitioning, so it's mostly simple sentences, I need to get them to expanded and complex. I know what to do. And then for listening and reading comprehension, using those RAS-L assessments, another nice
Mhm.
part of that is because they label, the question types and what skill that's working on or what language function specifically that's working on. So I go through each student sample and see, we're really struggling with sequencing. So I'm going to focus on adding more of that in this next trimester and build that up. And then we can, measure again and see, have we grown in sequencing, for example, or any of the other areas that students identify. So this is great for helping students and families understand their progress, but also as a teacher in identifying very specific skill gaps and being able to teach toward it over a trimester and measure again.
Absolutely. That's where the power happens for sure. I love that so much. And you make it sound so simple. So it
Once you have
definitely
it set up, it really is simple. The time commitment after the initial setup is really not that great. So I think it's once you get it set up, it is sustainable.
I love that. Now, why don't you share, and with that, Kelly, why don't you share one or two, tips for teachers who are, this is a new idea to them. This is something they're maybe, going to try for next school year. What are the best places to begin of getting set up?
So I would just recommend starting small if it feels overwhelming. And that means you can maybe focus on just one specific language domain that you notice, collectively your students struggled with last year, for example. Or maybe you just pick a subset of your students, like one grade level, or your newcomer entering level students, for example, and start small. You can create a Google Drive folder and then just try collecting one universal sample from your students this week and scoring that against a rubric, inform your instruction. And it doesn't have to be the whole thing, right, for it to be meaningful and to work. So start small and then build in those little reflection prompts for students. And I think you'll be really pleased to see how much it can impact your students and families and you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really, I think it can also impact, admin when you're in meetings, homeroom teachers when they're not sure what the students are, what they need to work on. I mean, it really can be something that can become something much greater that, but it's all about starting small. So I love that advice. And again, I just want to thank you for your generosity. We're going to put in the show notes a link that you can go and check out just the structure that Kelly's talking about, some ideas. Which is so generous and kind of you, because that really, I know, helps people to get started, get over that hump of like, how do I get started on this? Well, that's a great way to get started. Now, Kelly, we are coming to the end here, but I would love for you to share, people who have questions, want to learn more from you, talk more with you, where can they find you?
These days, I'm most active on LinkedIn. You can find me at Kelly Aldinger. I share what I'm reading and what I'm learning and some, snapshots of my classroom there as well. So you can connect with me there.
Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes as well. I know I've benefited from just following you and seeing what you're up to and what you're sharing. And it's been really, really impactful for me. So thank you so much, Kelly, for your time. And again, this is something that it just seems simple and powerful and something that I hope everyone listening to can really think about during the summer and start to just take, even an hour here and there during the summer to start to get some system set up around this. And they're going to see that it's really helping just drive instruction in a better way and helping your students really see their progress throughout this year. So thanks so much.
Thank you.